Still my hair bad.
What's up, primates? I'm Shane the Skeptic, and as always, I thank you for tuning in to my channel to watch my content. Today, I'm just going to be quickly responding to two separate videos that the two different apologists made in response to me. The reason I'm I'm responding to two separate apologist response videos in the same video, to be completely blunt with you, is because neither of them really warrant their own entire video response. So that's just the reason why I'm doing this together. It'd be a hell of a quick and boring video if I gave either of them their own video. But I will say this much. So we got two people here. I don't remember the first guy's name. The second video I'll be playing is from Tyler Vela, who appears to be here. I believe this is his. Yeah, this is him, the Freed Thinker. Hey, Tyler, glad you're here. I know that you consider me to be unworthy as an interlocutor because I'm just not well read enough, but I am glad that for the second time now, I was at least worthy enough for you to spend over 30 minutes responding to a mere TikTok video that I made. So at least I'm worthy enough for that. That's cool. But hey, I'll give you this. I thought Tyler's video was bad. Then I watched this other dude's video. All right, Tyler's video is not that bad. This first video is utterly cringe. It's horrible, man. But I do like the fact that the guy admits that he's not here to appeal to anybody other than people who already agree with him. I think that's good. So, this is hard to listen to. Let's go for it. Let's go.
Because I got so many good responses from responding to Cosmic Skeptic a few weeks ago. By the way, never heard back from him.
Which I know there's this smug little like, oh, I never heard back from him. Like, bro, you get like 30 views per video. Cosmic Skeptic has over 300,000 subscribers. Like, humble yourself, man.
Which is, I mean, typical. I expected that to happen, but this is more for Christians.
Oh yeah, pride is the biggest sin, isn't it? Okay.
So I wanted to go ahead and do another TikTok responding video. I want to look at a TikTok and I want to respond to it live. And once again, these are primarily for Christians. Okay, these are for you. These are for Christians who don't really know how to respond to those in the secular world, those who don't really know how to respond to the claims of atheists. Well, I want to help out with that.
Okay, so if you don't know how to respond to me, this is supposed to be your teacher. This guy's going to teach you how to respond. This is your lesson if you're a Christian. Pay attention.
My knowledge is no good if it's just staying in here and it's not coming out here. It's no good. So I want to share that with you. And today, our wonderful video comes from someone named Shane the Skeptic. Shane the Skeptic is the one that I'm going to be responding to. And I'll go ahead and I will play the video. Hopefully my headphones work this time. We'll see. Sorry, folks. Okay. We're all human beings here. I'm making mistakes. Oh, boy. You know, surprisingly, Christians are not perfect. It's weird. Okay, so here we go. Let's start it over again. And you're seeing me goof up live here, but, you know, it's whatever. So here we go.
How to debunk Christianity with 2 Bible verses.
Challenge accepted.
For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. So the truth of the Bible depends on the claim that I am aware of the God of the Bible's existence, but I am suppressing that knowledge.
No, it doesn't. No. I think you misread something there. The truth of the Bible does not depend upon the claim that you believe in God or else he's suddenly going to not exist. Please believe in me. You know, I don't want to fade into non-existence.
And the difference between Tyler and this guy is I think when Tyler misunderstands me and refutes his own misunderstanding, I don't think he's done in bad faith, and I don't think he's being deliberately dishonest. This guy, I cannot imagine, is being honest in his interpretation of what I just said. The point that I'm making is that you have a Bible verse that says that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, or some. This is a disputed thing, whether it's inerrant or not, but that everything in it is true, right? That's like, according to what branch of Christianity you subscribe to, that is what the Bible entails. Well, one of the claims of the Bible, according to the verse you just saw me read, is that I am actually aware that God exists, but I'm just suppressing that knowledge. So the claim of the Bible is that it is not the case that I seeked God, didn't find God, and genuinely stopped believing. So if it be the case that I did seek God, didn't find God, and genuinely do not believe, it falsifies Christianity, because the truth of Christianity depends on me actually being aware of it, but suppressing it.
No, that's that's not what's going on here. What's going on in the context of Romans 1, and by the way, I'm writing a book about Romans 1, verses 18 to 32. What's going on in Romans 1 is Paul starts off by talking about the Gentiles and how human beings, what we do is instead of accept God, we see very clearly by the environment around us, by all of the, especially as science continues to show us more and more things of how deep the universe is,
and refutes Genesis's claim of the age of the earth, refutes Genesis's story of origins. I mean, yeah, as we go on in science, we don't have more reason to believe in your God, but go on.
Down to the cellular level, how amazing it is. You can see all of that and go, man, there's got to be a creator here. There's got to be somebody who put all of this together. And what Paul is saying is that people see that and they suppress it. Their suppression does not make that disappear.
And he's going to continue on this misrepresentation that I said that me not believing in something causes it to stop existing, as though a thing can be the case and then my disbelief could change whether or not that's the case. He's going to keep pretending that that's what I said and refuting that instead of what I actually said. Let me go back like 5-10 seconds.
And what Paul is saying is that people see that and they suppress it. Their suppression does not make that disappear. Okay? The truth of the Bible does not depend in any way upon you accepting it. It doesn't. Anything that is true is going to continue to be true whether you believe in it or not.
That's
right?
how truth works.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Example. Mike here. Okay? Hi, Mike. Mike, I no longer believe in you. I think that you are, I don't know, something funny. I think that you're a slice of pizza. Okay? Now, does the mic change? Does my belief or lack of belief in something change reality around me? No. No, it doesn't. So, the truth of the Bible does not depend upon you believing in the God of the Bible.
The truth of the Bible depends on the claim that I actually am aware that your God exists, and I'm just in denial of it.
He's going to be real whether you like him or not.
And he's going to not be real whether you like him or not. The same way you're saying if God exists, my non-belief does not cause him to stop existing, you have to come to terms with the fact that if your God does not exist, which he doesn't, if your God does not exist, no matter how strongly you believe, it doesn't cause him to start to exist. This is not a point that should even have to be articulated between adults. And I mean, for the life of me, I cannot imagine that you're being honest in your interpretation of me.
Whether you believe in him or not. All that text is talking about is that what do people do with the knowledge of God? They suppress it. They suppress the knowledge of God. They suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Let's continue.
Which, you know what? All we're watching is a grown man actively cling to any denial that he can that there are people in the world that don't believe in the same God that he does. That's all you're watching right now. Is a grown man just trying to reconcile. Wait, other people don't believe that? Well, yeah, they do. They just suppress it. It's just denial. It's honestly pathetic. So, if it is the case that I genuinely just don't believe that the God of the Bible exists, then the Bible is necessarily false.
No. Yeah. He's starting off with a wrong foundation, a wrong understanding of that text.
Well, it's been years since I have had any belief.
I got you.
I'm gonna overdose on cringe here, you guys. I got ya.
Got ya. It's quote, and you heard it. I played it for you. It's been years since I've had any belief. Meaning what? Denoting what? You had belief at one point in time.
I agree. I did. Never denied that.
And what has happened since then? You have gone into disbelief.
Right. I do not believe it anymore. And what would you say if you were in denial of the fact that there are people who used to have your belief, but then after examining the evidence and arguments, stopped believing? What would you say if you were in just denial of the fact?
What have you done? Exactly what the text that you read from said. You did that. You suppressed the truth in unrighteousness. You have the truth, you understood the truth, you accepted the truth, and you suppressed it.
And I'm going to be honest with you here. This shit right here that Christians do, and some of them are smart and decent enough to not do this dumb shit right here. Some of them will say, actually, there's a different way to interpret this verse from Romans, and good for them. But when you have a person like this guy making this claim that I was fully aware of God's existence and made a decision, a conscious decision to suppress that knowledge, what he has done, ladies and gentlemen, is prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the God that he believes in does not exist. That's what follows from that. Now, this is gaslighting. For me, a person who was raised a Christian, who before leaving Christianity, people like a lot of you Christians, you want to think if someone left Christianity, they must have been mad at God. And then they just were like, fuck you, God, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm mad at you for not existing. That's what they think it is. That's not how this works. Okay. Between 10 and 12, I would pray like crazy. And there were even times I left my religion at 13. There were even times where I would cry while I prayed to God because I just didn't understand why God would not reveal himself to me. Like, why are you letting my mom and my dad and my sisters and everybody in my church, why my aunts and my uncles, why are you letting all of them know that you exist, but you're not letting me know you exist? So when I did believe in God, I wanted to know God existed. I wanted to feel the presence of God. I wanted to not continue lying to myself. I didn't want to be lying to myself. So for people to say, well, actually, you were well aware, but you consciously chose to suppress it. This is how you refute them for the rest of the discussion. Ask them this. Is the truth of your religion or the truth of your worldview dependent upon the claim that I actually believe you? That I actually know you're right? Deep down. If they say yes, and you know you don't believe them, they've just proven themselves wrong. Christians, imagine it like this. Imagine if I told you that you didn't actually believe in God. But you do believe in God, right? So like me telling you that you don't actually believe it, it doesn't do anything to you. You know that you actually believe it. So let me pull up the other video real quick. Yeah, that we're not responding, and his whole video isn't about me, just the first like 10 minutes or so. But he doesn't go on to make any points that he hasn't already made. And then Yeah, so let me get to the other video now. God damn it, let me check my history. My bad. You guys, for being boring. Why is that video not in my history? I just had it in here. Work with me, guys. Work with me. Wow, this is utterly annoying. Okay, finally. All right, let me open up my... Oh, my God. He said, no one says you consciously suppress it. Why don't you go watch the video I just played? He literally said, you're aware God exists, and you choose to suppress it. It's a choice.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of The Freed Thinker. As always, I'm your host, Tyler Vela. Thank you so much for joining. I'm actually coming out of the deep, dark wood to a reason. I'm going to skeptic. Let's see, is that? It's better. We can see him better. This is a video in which he responds to an issue dealing with the PSR, the principle of sufficient reason. So I'm going to walk through, listen through his comments. It's not very long. It's only about 2 minutes. I'm going to stop it every now and then and interject some comments. So with that, let's jump right in.
And, you know, since my video doesn't get played in its entirety, I'll just make a clarification. The video that I make argues that, or I gave my reason why I think it is the case that the PSR, principle of sufficient reason, and a necessary being are not compatible things to hold to. That like they're contradictories if you can't hold to both of them, or maybe contraries rather than contradictories. That's disputable, but that's the point that I'm making, is just that they're incompatible. And I do end the video by saying I'm open to the possibility that I'm wrong about this, but as far as I understand these, you know, the meaning of these terms and the way that they work, this is what I'm concluding by, you know, what they are. Is the principle of sufficient reason compatible with the existence of a necessary being? Now, for those who don't know, the principle of sufficient reason states that whatever exists must have a cause or ground for its existence. Now,
Okay, so let's start off there. He says that the principle of sufficient reason is that whatever exists must have a cause or ground for its existence. Not really. Shane's first mistake here is that he seems to think that there's just one thing known as the principle of sufficient reason, like there is the PSR, but there's actually a lot of different formulations of principles of sufficient reason. And this...
Well, and I'm aware that there's more than one version, but the consensus of what it means, like that, you know, principle of sufficient reason, if you go look it up and go look at all the different academic websites that you find, yes, you find papers arguing for alternative uses, but this is the use that you find most common, contemporary. If you look up what is the PSR, this is what you find. I understand that there are attempts to redefine it. We'll get into that part of the video later. But it's just sort of a thing that sometimes people do in philosophy is, okay, is X compatible with A? Well, it depends on how we define X. And you sort of redefine X or change some attributes of X to make X compatible with A. Now, redefining is not always as simple when it comes to philosophy, especially as providing an alternative definition. You have to write entire papers about the criteria through which you arrive at this definition that you have. And that's an entire process. So, you know, if you want to argue that free will should be defined differently, you're going to have to make a case other than just defining it differently. And there are mountains of papers where people try to do so.
This version that he stated is a pretty hard version of it. That's pretty unpopular and rejected by a lot of philosophers.
I disagree there.
Yeah, just a lot. And for some of the reasons we'll discuss for below. So,
or I don't disagree that it's rejected, but this idea that it's unpopular, that's the part I disagree with.
For example, The Kalam cosmological argument uses a rather modest version, and it doesn't say that everything that exists would have to have a cause, but only that things that begin to exist must have a cause. And that's a causal version of the principle of sufficient reason. There are other versions also that are based on the idea of grounding, metaphysical grounding or dependence. There are some that are just based on you have to have an explanation, which need not be causally understood. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. And we'll see that this problem where he seems to think that the PSR is this hard causal version of it, that whatever exists has to have a cause for its existence, is going to rear its head as we go through his video. So to say that there is this one.
Okay, so the criticism is that I'm wrong for basically subscribing to this definition. And I'm gonna get this tab back open, but before I do, I want to open a different tab. Because I think it would be helpful. I'm kind of beating a dead horse on this point, but you know, why not? Let's see. Okay, you can look this up for yourself. This is from the Plato Stanford.edu, Stanford Encyclopedia. Same thing I'm referring to later in this video when I talk about contingency and a necessary being. But yeah, look, if you look up like principle of sufficient reason, it's a powerful and controversial philosophical principle stipulating that everything must have a reason, cause, or ground. So I don't know. I'm mistaken for saying that. Well, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia, that's the understanding that you get. Just to clarify. And I gave the caveat earlier of acknowledging, you know, other understandings exist, but I don't know, this idea that it's just like wrong of me to define it that way is kind of, I don't know. I'd work on a better argument than that.
One thing known as the PSR, that all things have a cause, is kind of, I don't know if misleading is the right term, or I don't want to say he's ignorant, but he really should go and read some of the literature on it by Proust and Belleau and Wiggins and some others, because that's just not entirely accurate. Hey, Shane's actually listening. Wow, we caught on. You were here quick, man.
I got confused about this because no, I was not actually listening. I was not tuned in for the live. Then I saw someone in the live chat named Shane, and I was like, oh, he thought that was me. So that's what happened there. That really confused me, but okay.
And I didn't even advertise for it. Thanks for joining. Put your comments in there. But yeah, so this is going to be my critique of your TikTok. So.
Now, in philosophy, the word being doesn't necessarily mean minded being. It could just mean a thing that exists. So even this would fit this definition of the word being. But obviously, this would be a contingent being, not a necessary one. That's because in philosophy, the term necessary means that it could not have been otherwise. So, for example, that I exist is true, but it is a contingent truth because it could have been the case that I didn't exist, say if my parents didn't reproduce. As to where 2 + 2 = 4 is a necessary truth because in all possible worlds that could not have been otherwise.
Now this is going to cause some other problems for him as well, because here he conflates a difference between a necessary being or a contingent being and a necessary fact or a contingent fact. Those aren't actually the same thing. So unless he wants to commit himself to that 2 + 2 = 4 is a being in some sense, like a banana is a being, that it's a necessary being in the way that, say, a theist would claim that God is a necessary being, he's making a little bit of a conflation here, and it's going to cause some problems for him. Again.
So, no, I'm actually not unaware of the difference between a necessary fact and a necessary being. What I was doing was I was providing an example of a necessary truth versus a contingent truth. And the reason was to help provide an understanding of what the word necessary means in philosophy. So I wasn't saying that 2 + 2 = 4 is a being. Rather, I was arguing that 2 + 2 = 4 is a necessary truth. Now, I did leave a comment, which he responded to. So he did at least explain what he meant here. And he said, I meant you move from one to the other. You're talking about necessary beings. Then, as your example, you gave a necessary fact. Those aren't the same was the point. And you know what? It's a fair caveat because I was talking about beings, and then to explain the word necessary, gave an example of necessary truths versus contingent truths. I don't see this as a huge error on my part because I was just trying to give an illustration of what the word necessary meant, but fair enough. I'll take the criticism.
Down the road, because it's not entirely clear that 2 + 2 is 4 is a necessary being, although it is a necessary fact. So minor point, but it's going to be important as we go.
2 + 2 could not equal 4. So again, a contingent.
Which is true. There's no such world. There's no possible world in which 2 + 2 = 5.
So we at least agree
right?
on
There's
what
no
a necessary
such possible
fact
world
is.
in which there's a married bachelor, right? Those things are just in principle contradict each other. There's no logically possible world in which logically incoherent things are true. Is essentially what he's trying to get at.
Being is a being that is contingent upon something else for its existence, while a necessary being could not have not existed and could not be contingent upon anything else. So
that's not entirely accurate.
And
we'll talk about that in just a second. But it's
okay.
just not the case that something being necessary also means that it's not contingent in another sense, right? We'll talk about this.
All right.
But modal logistics.
That is a point that he goes on to argue for a bit in this video, and I'm gonna play it one more time. And if I'm wrong and he's right about this, I would like to find out. I am quite confident that this is wrong, and I mean quite confident.
Also means that it's not contingent. It's just not the case that something being necessary also means that it's not contingent in another sense.
And he's going to give his argument for this, so we're going to hear him out. But he's saying just because a being is necessary doesn't mean it's not contingent. That is the claim that is about to be supported.
Right, we'll talk about this. But modal logicians for a long time have talked about things that are necessarily contingent or contingently necessary or necessarily contingently necessary and so on and so forth. So it's just not the case that if something is necessary, it's not contingent. I know that sounds a little hard to understand, but again, it's just a known fact in modal logic, right? And I'll give some examples later on.
Let's suppose, for the sake of the argument, that a necessary being existed.
Okay, so here he says, let's suppose that a necessary being exists. Great. This is important to remember because it shows us the kind of argument that he's making. He's making an internal critique. It's of the form, let's suppose that X is true, and let's see what follows. He's going to try to show that there's an inconsistency in trying to affirm that a necessary being exists and in trying to affirm a principle of sufficient reason. Well, if he means simply this kind of hard version of a principle of sufficient reason, then maybe, because it's just not the case that everything that exists has a cause for its existence. But I can just stipulate and grant that. But that doesn't mean that we're kind of, caution to the wind and we have no recourse and there's no principles of sufficient reasons that are compatible with the.
So principle of sufficient reason as it's being used in this video is the hard definition that he's referring to. So when he talks about this internal critique, so the internal critique I'm doing is, let's say we're granting that a necessary being exists, and then from granting that, trying to reason out whether or not we could still hold to the PSR. Specifically the version that I'm using for all intents and purposes of this video.
Affirmation of a necessarily existing being. So this is an internal critique, and it means he can't help himself to assumptions later that entail not X or chastise defenses against his argument for those who help themselves to that very assumption because he's already granted it as part of his argument. So let's keep watching.
We don't know if it's a god or if it's a non-minded being, but there's a necessary being that exists, right? Okay, well, to accept that is to accept that a being exists without a cause, because if something else had to cause it, it wouldn't be necessary. It would be.
Okay, so again, here he's confused. He's conflating, I think, a necessary entity and a necessary fact. But it also shows that
I am actually really kind of confused on how that is his understanding of what I just said. I don't know that I really have anything to add other than I don't know how he got that from what I was saying. Like Because I could understand the first time that he said that. Like, I could see his reasoning process and how he arrived at that, right? But right there, I don't know. That just kind of lost me. I don't know.
That he thinks that something being necessary can't have a ground for its existence that's dependent upon something else.
Right, because that's what it means to be
It just
contingent.
shows his confusion a little bit. The fact is,
It just shows that I'm confused because that is what the word contingent means.
if something is necessary, the fact that something is necessary just is the explanation for its being, right? Its own necessity explains its existence. The question is if the kind of necessary being that we're talking about, or the necessary fact that we're talking about, is grounded or ungrounded on some other necessary being or fact being the case, right? So he says that if something something else had to cause it, it would not be necessary. Again, no. Modal logic.
All right, and I'm going to tell you what I think his error is, and through the rest of the video, or at least the next couple minutes, he kind of goes on to, at least for me, confirm the error that I think he's making. I think Tyler is conflating necessary for with necessary in and of itself. All right. For example, water is contingent upon oxygen. So oxygen is necessary for water. That doesn't mean that oxygen is necessary in that it is necessary in and of itself. So oxygen is not a necessary being. Oxygen is not a necessary entity, but it's necessary for water. So you have water, which is contingent upon it. So oxygen is a necessary being for you if you're water, but it's not a necessary being in and of itself. And when we talk about a necessary being, as is argued for in, for example, the cosmological argument, that's what's being argued for. So something in and of itself, necessitating itself. So yeah.
And modal logicians for a long time have shown that there can be contingently necessary or necessarily contingent things. It's just not the case that a necessary fact or a necessary being are themselves without causes or grounded.
Okay.
It's just that their causes are grounded upon other necessary beings or fact. It's just that dependence relationship couldn't not be, right? It would be the case that the kind of dependence that the latter has on the former itself would be a necessary fact, right? So imagine, for the sake of an argument, that there's a necessary bowling ball and a necessary pillow, right? And the bowling ball sits eternally and necessarily on the pillow. I know this seems weird, but just granted for the sake of argument, right? Such that the pillow has an indentation necessarily and eternally based on this relationship, right? Well, it's just necessarily the case that that's true, but it doesn't mean that the bump being in the pillow isn't grounded or isn't dependent upon something else.
So it's not necessary that there is an indentation in the pillow. The indentation in the pillow is contingent upon the state of affairs, i.e. the bowling ball resting upon it.
It's just that relationship is just as necessary as the beings themselves, right? It's a weird example.
And you know, I understand you say yourself it's a weird example. I'm pretty sure you're probably not arguing that a bowling ball or a pillow actually are necessary beings. You know, according to your example, you're saying, granting for the sake of the argument, that the bowling ball was a necessary bowling ball and that the pillow was a necessary pillow. So, you know, in trying to be honest and accurate in my interpretation, I don't think you're arguing that that's the case. But if the argument is okay, that indentation is necessary, no, it's not. It's contingent upon the state of affairs.
Example I know, but it just goes to show that just because something is necessary, it doesn't actually mean that it's not dependent or grounded upon something else. However, we could just
so this is actually worthy of addressing. He says, right, but there's no possible world where there is no indentation. In all possible worlds where the bowling ball wasn't there, there's no indentation. But if we're granting for the sake of the argument that it was necessarily there, then you could say, if you have the if and clause, perhaps there necessarily is an indentation if there was a bowling ball on the pillow. But I'm still reluctant to conclude that it's a necessary fact. But I mean, it's a fact. Yeah, I'm a little bit lost on that one.
We could even stipulate that. We could put a pin in that and say, well, the fact that something is necessary, again, we don't have to go full bore and affirm this kind of hard causal principle of sufficient reason. We could say that there is a more modest principle of sufficient reason where we're talking about explanation, such that this thing's necessary existence explains why it exists. It just explains why it exists because it exists necessarily. That just is a valid explanation that avoids bruteness, right? A brute thing, a brute fact is something that has no explanation for its existence, right? Whatsoever, right? It's a contingent thing that exists without explanation. Well, those are very unsatisfying because we think, well, those types of things, all things should have an explanation for their existence. And if we just say, well, there's not even an explanation for it, you can't even appeal to necessity, well, then it just becomes inexplicable why that thing exists. But necessary beings and necessary facts, they have those, they have their own necessity as the explanation. Now, necessary facts, for example, do seem to cry out for some type of grounding, some type of truth maker. What makes them true? Why are they true? Right? That then gets into the question of dependence and explanation and grounding for these necessary facts. Whereas a necessary being, if it exists necessarily in an ungrounded, non-contingent way, its own necessity just explains its own existence. Okay, we'll keep going.
Contingent. So if we're to believe in a necessary being, we can't really continue to say that anything that exists must have a cause for its existence.
Which is fine. Like I said, if he wants to say that there is this principle of sufficient reason, that is this hard causal version of it,
which is the version being used for all intents and purposes of this video. So it might actually be the case that by this definition of the PSR, you agree with my argument. And if you are going with alternative definitions, say that according to other definitions, my argument is wrong. But according to the way that I'm defining the PSR in the video that I'm making the argument, it seems like maybe we actually don't disagree here, Tyler.
Then sure. I mean, most people reject that anyways. So yeah, we can reject that, or we can just stipulate that to avoid the brunt of his argument.
Since holding that a being needed a cause for it to exist would make it contingent, and thus it would not be necessary.
Again, something having a cause or ground or explanation of existence, even as necessary, doesn't therefore mean it's not necessary.
Yes, it does. And I don't know if I should pull up the Stanford Encyclopedia now, or let him talk a little bit more, and then I'll pull it up.
Now, some people try to get around this by redefining the principle of sufficiency.
You know what? I'm going to because then he gets onto another point. So, okay, let me play the last point that he said. Be charitable here. What was the last thing?
Cause or ground or explanation of existence, even as necessary, doesn't therefore mean it's not necessary.
Okay, so we're saying if something has a cause or explanation for its existence, that doesn't mean it's not necessary. So, okay. Let me share my other screen. My other slide. Let's see. All right, this is the Stanford Encyclopedia. This is the Kalam cosmological argument, or this is the cosmological argument. Part of it, which makes the deductive argument from contingency. Let's read through it. A contingent being such that if it existed, could not have did exist. Let's see. All contingent beings have a sufficient cause or fully adequate explanation for their existence. Obviously, I agree. This is basically a tautological premise right here. The sufficient cause of or fully adequate explanation for the existence of contingent beings is something other than the contingent being itself. Right, because if it was contingent upon itself, I mean, to be contingent means you're dependent upon something else, right? So agreeing here. Now watch this. The sufficient cause of or fully adequate explanation for the existence of contingent beings must either be solely other contingent beings, you know, water depends on oxygen. So there we go. That makes sense, right? Oxygen could be contingent, but then it's necessary for water. Or include a non-contingent, in other words, necessary being. And this is not the first time, this is not the last time you'll see this. Necessary is added in parentheses after non-contingent because that means the same fucking thing. Contingent beings alone cannot provide a sufficient cause, however, fully adequate explanation for the existence of other contingent beings. Yes, alone. I mean, I don't really have to address this argument. I'm just looking at the way the word is defined here rather than this argument, because this isn't Tyler's argument, at least in this video. Okay, well, look at this premise here. Therefore, what sufficiently causes or fully adequately explains the existence of contingent beings must include a non-contingent, necessary being. As in, you could have just used the word necessary here, or you could have used the word non-contingent here. Or you could have had necessary and then non-contingent in parentheses. Therefore, a necessary being, a being such that if it exists, it cannot not exist, exists. So that's the argument. So yes, to be non-contingent and necessary, same thing. So if you try to argue that a necessary being could be contingent, no, because what it means to be contingent is not that. Now I'm going to go to back to the video. Let's see, share screen. All right. Now, some people try to get around this by redefining the principle of sufficient reason or making there out to be different categories that it applies to.
But again, that's not a redefining of it. No one's redefining of it. This just is what the philosophical debate is about. Again, if he reads through the literature, it's just why it's debated for lots of other reasons besides even the one that he's pointing out here.
The definition of it is debated.
No one's redefining it. It's just,
they're arguing over what the definition is, but nobody's redefining it.
just some people reject this really hard version of the PSR because it seems to have some problems.
Some people reject this definition in this context, the same thing. Some people reject this definition, so they argue for an alternative one. That is what it means to redefine something.
With it, right? And so they accept more modest versions of it. In fact, some people go all the way and say that there's no meaningfully comprehensive principle of sufficient reason, even if they're going to think, well, there are some that are useful as kind of rule of thumb, but we can't press them too hard to try to universalize them, right? So you do have those kind of PSR skeptics out there as well, but no one's redefining any terms, right? This came up in a debate I had with him about free will, where he seems to think that people using different concepts and using different conceptual schemes about how these things play out is somehow everyone's redefining terms. Well, no, it's just people have different concepts and we're trying to find out which concepts are useful and true to reality. That's
like which concept of free will, which definition of free will, right? And I actually think the example that he gave is great. I would likewise see this as analogous. I think in the free will discussion, and I'm aware it's not just like, oh, some people just try to redefine it. No, you have like mountains and mountains of papers where people try to argue to make their case for their alternative definition. Because if you define free will as something other than what free will actually is, you could justify compatibilism, i.e. the idea that free will and determinism are compatible with one another. But it is redefining. It is what they do.
That's not redefining.
And I would say, and Tyler, you probably shouldn't disagree with me on this point. If you disagree with me, read some of the literature about it yourself. You find plenty. Anybody who's not in my Discord, go to my Discord server. I'll upload another paper I haven't read yet about the principle of sufficient reason, arguing for another use of it. There's a lot of academic literature in my server you can find to read up on this kind of stuff. So.
So
PDF
maybe
files right
there's
there
some way
for
of
you.
reconciling this, but for now, I'm just going to have to say, I don't think that these are compatible things to hold to. Whether you're theist or atheist, as a philosopher, I think you're in a dilemma here. You cannot hold that there is a necessary being, i.e. a being that did not have a cause for the ground of its existence, and then also hold that if something exists, it must have some explanation, some cause, some ground for its existence.
Well, here he's moved it, right? So I'm glad he includes the atheist here. And I wonder actually what he would do with necessary facts, like the ones he mentioned, like 2 + 2 = 4, for example, or other ones like that. There's no bachelors that are married, or that there's no squares that are circles, right? Well, those are necessary facts, but is he going to say that those are simple brute facts? Well, I mean, he doesn't have to. He can fall back on explanation, right? He can say that those, that just when we understand the conceptual schemes of them, right, that their necessity actually explains their truth. Now, I can push further and say, well, what grounds that? Because necessary facts being ungrounded seems to have other problems that necessary beings being ungrounded doesn't. But he switches a little bit. You'll notice that he was saying, well, the PSR is that it's uncaused. But then at this point, he does seem to be aware that there's these other conceptions that something, the PSR is about explanation or about grounding. But once you grant an explanation, something's being a necessary being just is an explanation for its own existence. So that actually resolves the problem. So if he wants to say, well, you can't affirm a necessary being and you can't affirm the hard PSR, sure, again, we can just stipulate away from that. But if he wants to say, okay, well, we'll take a more modest version, we'll take a more about explanation, well, then there doesn't seem to be a problem, and he would actually have to engage with the literature to show why there's a problem with this type of.
Okay, so I'm going to play back because it sounded like he might have, once again, agreed with me according to the definition used for the intents and purposes of this video.
Stipulate away from that. But if he wants to say, okay, well, we'll take a more modest version, we'll take a so that actually resolves the problem. So if he wants to say, well, you can't affirm a necessary being and you can't affirm the hard PSR, sure, again, we can just
Okay, I'm gonna take that sure as an agreement with me. You disagree with the definition I applied for the sake of my argument. But if you granted that definition, it seems like you would arrive at the same conclusion.
Stipulate away from that. But if he wants to say, okay, well, we'll take a more modest version, we'll take a more about explanation, well, then there doesn't seem to be a problem, and he would actually have to engage with the literature to show why there's a problem with this type of explanation. That is, it seems that by going this route, he's actually committed himself to a whole host of other metaphysical conundrums, simply because he's unwilling to accept that the PSR can apply to explanations in one sense, but then he seems to understand that the PSR can be about explanations. But the instant that you accept that there is this concept of PSR about explanations, well, then necessary beings are explanations for their own being. So and even though they don't need causes. So, anyways, I'm gonna end it there. He has a couple remaining marks, but I hope that was helpful.
All right. You know what? It was helpful. So I'm gonna give you this much. I don't know. The first time I saw your video and I saw you start arguing that a necessary being could also be contingent, I mean, I still am kind of like, huh? But man, after watching that other guy's video, all right, Tyler, you're not so bad. I will say Tyler, at least I don't think was dishonest in his video. You know, honesty at least. I don't even remember clicking on that. Just okay. Hide current comment. There we go. Let's see. I'm gonna put a link to my Discord server in the chat right here. I saw you put a comment saying you have papers you'd like me to read as well. If you have them on PDF files, I would appreciate it if you would go into my Discord server, and you could drop those in, either the Knowledge Bar or the Atheist Alley channels on that server. But yeah, so in conclusion, everybody, at least Tyler tried. The other guy, I think it was pretty. I don't even think he was being honest, but I don't know, for everybody watching this video, whether you be theist, atheist, religious, or secular, I wish nothing but the best for you and everybody that you love. Stay safe. Have a good day.